Hello and welcome. This is Colby Cheese, and you're watching Summoner Academy, your home for League of Legends tips, tricks, and strategies. Hey, what's up guys? Colby Cheese here. This is going to be episode number 4 of Summoner Academy. This episode I'm going to show you how to choose the right items in the right situation and just kind of go over some of those different items. Each character is different, and while you can only try to follow builds on websites, it's always beneficial to know why you're building the items that you're building and when you should deviate from those standard builds and whatnot, and just which cases you need to change things up. The idea is to learn what your character needs based on the enemies that they're facing and how those items synergize with your abilities. So I'm actually going to start off by discussing some of the gold per 5 items as well as potions and wards and things like that. This applies not only to support characters but to junglers and even your solo laners. The reason I want to talk about gold per 5 first is that you actually can't, their value cannot be overstated. If you get it early and it doesn't affect your gameplay early on, it's almost always worth it in the end to have those. So let me just show you what I'm talking about. If you get 1 gold per 5 item at 8 minutes, and by the 40-minute mark, that's an extra 960 gold that you've gotten from that one item. That's approximately 43 creep score, or you can look at it as 2.5 hero kills. Now, another thing is, if let's say you get 2 gold per 5 items, let's say you get the actual Heart of Gold and you get the Philosopher's Stone by 12 minutes, okay? So you get your Heart of Gold by 8 minutes and then like a Philosopher's Stone by 12 minutes or vice versa. At 40 minutes, that's going to be an extra 1,800 gold or around 6 hero kills, and you can look at it as about around 80 creep score. Pretty big difference just for buying 2 items, which you can then sell off later for even more gold and replace those with some real items. This is the perfect thing to do on support champions to build those gold per 5 items, since you are going to have less creep score than other champions. But if you can build this on a champion that doesn't really need to go for those early door ends and heavy damage items early on, if you can sustain yourself and you want to go for that good late game, build you 1 or 2 gold per 5 items, especially on your top lane carries that are just going to sit there in that top lane and farm all game. Then not only are you going to have big creep score, because that's what you're going to be doing anyways, but those gold per 5 items are going to give you even more of a boost into late game. And 40 minutes is pretty average for a game time. Sometimes they go longer, sometimes they go shorter, but I like to use that number as a benchmark, and so that's something to think about. The other thing is buying actual wards and potions. A lot of people don't think about this, but every time you go back to the base to, for whatever reason, whether you got pushed out of your lane or you just needed to buy in general, try to always pick up 1 or 2 health potions and a ward, regardless of what champion you are. Whether you're the support or you're the solo lane or you're the jungler, you should always try and have one of those wards in your inventory so that you can place it in critical areas around the map. Even if you hold on to it for a little while because there's good ward coverage already, then once those wards go down, you always have that ward to put down. Also, the health potion helps you stay in the lane longer, and that extra 200 to 400 health from 1 or 2 health potions, it really does pay off. Every time I go back, if I'm pushed out of the lane, I'll definitely get a health potion. That way I can just stay in there and farm longer and longer and longer and not lose CS and not lose experience in my lane. And that's kind of the idea behind always picking up those potions and wards. A lot of times you see these builds on websites and they don't really mention this because it's something that you just need to consciously do, is always be buying those wards and potions when you go back in between the items that make up your build. As far as oracles and other elixirs are concerned, generally elixirs aren't that useful until you've built up all your items and you don't really have anything else to build. They have been nerfed quite a bit in the past. Also, another thing to take note of is that a good point to actually use elixirs, if you're going to, is if you're really going to push in for the win. Let's say you just picked up a Baron and you want to push down those towers and you want to make that final push, pick up 1 or 2 elixirs and do that. Otherwise, don't waste your money on them because you want to finish up your items. When you're buying in oracles, you pretty much want to make sure that you are the support champion, or later on in the game, somebody who is not going to be dying a lot. When you lose in oracles, when you die and you have an oracles and you lose that, that's a huge hit for your team. that is not only gold for the person who kills you, but think of it as like pretty much losing a dragon, because that's 400 gold plus whatever 300 gold that you give. So that's 700 gold loss if you have an Oracles and you lose it. Oracles is definitely worth getting because you can kill the enemy wards and take map control from the enemy. However, you have to play a little extra careful when you do have that Oracles. Don't be running into bad positioning, running into bushes that you don't know about. That's the main thing when you pick up an Oracles. So definitely have an Oracles in the game at some point, but be extra careful when you have that because it is a huge loss if you lose an Oracles, especially if you're going to buy a couple more. Okay, so let's actually talk about some other items such as the defense items and the damage items that you're going to be picking up on your different characters. One thing that I feel is kind of misunderstood by a lot of new players is that they have trouble deciding on which defense items to buy in games. Like, do they buy magic resist, do they buy health, do they buy armor? Which one, which item is better? So as far as defenses are concerned, I think that there are a few things you have to take into consideration. One thing that you can actually take a look at is that if your champion is tankier and it has higher, scaling armor and magic resist than most other champions, or especially if they have some kind of resist aura or a steroid ability, then that's actually going to make health a little bit more valuable. But if you're a champion with some heals and your team has some heals and sustain and things like that, then actually building up resistances is more beneficial because those scale really well together. All right, best way that I have that I can explain for you to learn which items to build is one of two ways. First off is to just take a look at the enemy team. Hold down that tab button and take a look at all of their damaging champions. The ones that are going to be doing the most damage. Do they do mostly magic damage or do they do mostly physical damage? Who is going to be the person that's always going to be attacking you the most? That's the person, or those are the champions that you want to build to defend against. They may have a, for example, like an Ashe or something who's doing a lot of damage to your tank, but let's say you're the mage and you stay in the back, and you're actually not getting hit by Ashe, but for some reason their Annie keeps jumping in and blowing you up, then you probably want to go for some magic resist. But if you're running in and you're getting hit by the, everyone who does physical damage, then of course you're going to be going for the defensive armor items. Another way to tell what items to build is by taking a look at the death screen. Let's say you just got killed a couple times. Every time I die, I take a look at it and see what the top sources of damage were on me. Was it magical damage or was it physical damage? And then that's what I try and build to defend against. So one good example that I like to give is trying to defend against a Karthus. Karthus can be a huge issue with his ultimate. So one thing that a lot of players can do to defend against him is just to build a quick Negatron before you finish up your entire build. You don't even have to turn that Negatron into anything, but just having that extra 48 magic resist is a huge amount whenever you get hit by that Karthus ultimate, and that's just one easy way to counter a champion like that. Let's say you're going to be in the laning phase for a while, you can pick up a Negatron cloak to counter champions that do all magical damage to you, and then you don't even have to build that into an item until later on. You can finish up building your damage items and things like that, and so that's just one example of kind of building to counter the champions that are going to be doing damage to you. I like to talk about Banshees Veil here. So lately I've actually been buying a Quicksilver Sash over buying an actual Banshees Veil due to the fact that I feel it's a lot better to have that cleanse on command rather than just the Banshees, which is a little bit more situational. So, somebody who can poke you down and take off that Banshees very easily is going to counter you if you have that Banshees. Whereas if you need to get out of an Ashe arrow, for example, you should always be getting something like a Quicksilver Sash, in my personal opinion, because Ashe technically can shoot out her volley and take out your shield really easily. But if you get hit with an Ashe arrow or something like that, then you can just Quicksilver Sash out immediately and keep on running away and you should be good. So those are just some things to consider whenever you are buying items, is what kind of active does this have and is it going to help me out? So if I'm a tank and I want to run in and initiate and slow down the enemy team, then I'll be picking up a Randuin's Omen because that'll help me do that. But if I have a lot of people on the enemy team that rely on attack speed and just attacking people fast, let's say they have like an Aurelia and they have a Caitlyn on their team, I'll probably build like a Frozen Heart to slow down the enemy's attack speed rather than a Randuin's Omen, which would just slow down their run speed and stuff like that. So that's something to think about as well when you're building your defensive items. The next thing to consider is damage items. So if you're playing a melee carry or a ranged DPS carry, it could vary a little bit. So I'm just going to try and cover both of those. On every single ranged carry, you're going to have probably the same kind of setup, same build. When you're in the laning phase, most likely, depending on who you're laning with, if you're laning solo or if you're laning with a support, this is going to determine your starting items. So if you're laning with someone who can actually heal you up in the lane, you'll just start with a Doran's Blade. But if you are laning with somebody who cannot really heal you up, or if you're laning by yourself in a solo lane, then you really need to pick up boots and 3 health potions. This way you can sustain yourself in the lane long enough to farm up and then go back and get some other items once you are able to. Now the idea is that once you are forced back, you can either pick up 1 or 2 more Dorans if you need that extra early game advantage, or potentially just turn your boots into Berserker Greaves at that point. You just kind of have to determine on if you need that faster attack speed or if you need more damage in your lane. So I usually like to stick with 1 or 2 Dorans and Berserker Greaves early on if I can, but the ideal situation is to, as quickly as possible, move to that BF sword. So if you're able to farm well enough in the lane, pick up that BF sword so that you can turn it later on into an Infinity Edge. The final build for most attack damage carries is going to be your Infinity Edge and then your Phantom Dancer, and eventually go into potentially a Bloodthirster and a Last Whisper, and just, full out damage. You can potentially get you some defensive items after your Infinity Edge and Last Whisper if you feel like you're doing enough damage and you need a little bit of survivability, and at that point you can just kind of go along with the defensive items that I talked about earlier. Usually when you do get a defensive item on a carry, the 2 main ones are going to be the Guardian Angel and the Banshees Veil. However, for the most part, I just like to build my carries very attack damage heavy and focus on good positioning and whatnot, which I can talk about that in another video. For your melee carries though, you have a few more options. So if you are trying to be tanky enough to sit there and stick to a target and keep them slowed down and take some damage but dish out some on your own, one of the popular builds is to go for probably a Frozen Mallet and an Atmos. This gives you that armor to protect yourselves from enemy melees, and it can slow down your targets as well as give you that extra damage based on how much health you have. You can use this on several carries such as Garen and Pantheon and certain people like that. For AP carries, ability powered champions are essentially the same as attack damage, but with the different items. You're always going to be building up a quick death cap for the most part, and potentially after that it kind of varies. Do you need more magic pen? Do they have squishy carries, or do they have more tanky champions? This is where it kind of differs, and this you can say transfers over to attack damage carries as well. Do you build armor pen or magic pen, and do you build the like the void staff or the last whisper that gives you the percentage of penetration? You usually want to build one or the other, not both, because they kind of hurt each other if you build them both. The thing to do on this, I always say, is to just take a look at the enemy champions, and do they have like 3 or 4 tanks that are, or people that have like over 100 magic resist or armor, and if they do, this is probably when you want to go for the Last Whisper or the Void Staff. Now, the other thing to note is, do they have like 3 or 4 squishies, people who have less than 100 and are gonna, probably not get a lot more than that. That's when you want to go more for the magic pen or for the armor pen on the items that you're building. As far as the early game on your magic carries, before the death cap that you build up, there's some people like to do another thing. They'll go for a Rod of Ages on some champions as well. So there's 2 different ways to do it. And that is, you can go for 2 or 3 Doran's rings, which is like a poor man's version of the Rod of Ages, and it doesn't cost as much as Rod of Ages. You can get it quicker, and it gives you a really nice early game advantage, and then you can quickly go into a death cap after that. Or you can go quickly for the mana crystal and 2 health potions early on, and then pick up the catalyst quickly, and then you can go into that Rod of Ages. Personally, I usually nowadays favor the Doran's into Death Cap build better, but a lot of people still like the Rod of Ages, and it is a great item. You just have to be able to farm it up quickly enough for it to be effective for you. So far, I've kind of covered a wide range of items and topics and whatnot. hopefully I've given you a little bit of an idea on different items to help you build. I did want to talk about the stack items though, and my best advice is to just never buy them. They're not really worth it. I mean, they can be, and they're a fun item to use. If you're just noob stomping and crushing opponents all the time, then yeah, okay, stack items are great. Yeah, they're nice. I mean, it's efficient after you get about 10 stacks and whatnot. However, if you're in a really competitive environment, if you're actually in ranked games and you're trying to build up, you're probably not going to always be crushing your opponents in this way. So stack items are generally going to hurt you and slow down your build and not do what you'd want them to do. The thing I always say is that if you build a stack item and you're losing, you're not gonna get the effect out of it. And if you're winning and you get the stacks out of it, then you probably would have won anyways. And it's better off to just get the item that you should have gotten in the first place, because you never know how the game's gonna go. Finally, I want to leave you guys with some ideas for your support champions. Support champions can be built in various different sets of ways. A lot of times I like to build an Aegis on a support champion, even if they're not necessarily the tank, but you kind of have to coordinate with that tank. Sometimes your tanks actually do want to build an Aegis, so just chat with them and figure out if they're going to do that. An Aegis is such a huge benefit to your team. It gives you a large amount of gold, efficiency, and the stats that it gives your entire team. So I do like to build that Aegis if I can on a support champion. There are some other support items as well that I don't normally like to build. For the most part, I like to just build my supports in a way that supports their individual playstyle. So if it's like a Soraka or somebody who has a lot of utility with casting lots of spells, I'll probably just do lots of cooldown reduction. Cooldown reduction is really great on support champions, but another thing to think about is just making them tanky enough to take damage, buying those oracles when you can, and building up items that are going to support your team other than that. But I usually don't build the Shirelias unless it's a certain circumstance, like it's very rare that I build that, but it can have its uses. Some people like that more than others. You kind of have to decide for that one on your own. I never really build the Soul Shroud. It's nice, it gives you cooldown reduction and a little bit of health. However, for the most part, I'd really prefer to just buy more wards or just build some items that, again, like I said, complement the abilities that I have myself. So anyways, guys, that's going to be it for my item guide today. It's long enough already as it is. So if you enjoyed this, be sure to tune in next week, as I'm going to be doing a full guide covering ward placement, clairvoyance, and just general map awareness and what to be aware of in different situations. So see you guys around next time, guys. It's Colby Cheese. Peace out.